Hi, everyone. Welcome to Improvise, Adapt, and Overcome, Leveling Up Your Blue Team. I am Mark Orlando, and over the next 50 or so minutes, we're going to talk about ways that you can level up your blue team. And I'll talk about some of my experiences, both positive and not so positive. And we'll talk through a variety of different things within Blue Team. And for the purposes of this discussion, whatever blue team means to you, however you define that, I'm going to use the phrase blue team, and security operations and cyber defense. All of those are going to be somewhat interchangeable for the purposes of this talk. So digging into a little bit more detail, over the next several minutes, we're going to talk about some common challenges that we all face, that I've seen many, many times working with various blue teams, and what we can do to address and overcome those challenges. We'll talk about some of the fundamentals, basic things that if you're not doing right or well, you're really going to have a tough time leveling up and making the kinds of improvements and having the kinds of impact that you want to have. We'll talk about measurement, right? So you can't manage, you can't improve what you can't measure. We'll talk about ways that we can do that so that we know how and when we're improving, some of the pitfalls in making some of those improvements and trying to get where you want to be. And then my favorite part of the talk, which is dumb things that I've done. So mistakes that I will share with you that hopefully you can learn from. And I'll share a little bit about what I learned from those as well. And we'll close out by talking about things that you can do today and things that you can do in the coming weeks and months and beyond to make specific measurable improvements in your security operations and in your blue team. So let's dive in. Why me? Why am I the person that's giving this talk today? So blue team is a passion of mine. It's where I've spent all of my career in security for the most part, going back about 19 years that I've been working in security operations. Today, I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Bionic, which is a blue team focused cybersecurity company. Before that, I built and led and worked in security teams at the White House, the Department of Energy. I was the CTO for Raytheon's cyber business. And I spent many years on the managed security service provider and MDR side of things as well, working with a variety of different customers. I'm also an instructor at the SANS Institute. I teach SEC 450, which is Blue Team Fundamentals, Security Operations, and Analysis. Now, why am I giving this talk? It's a very good question. So in my experience, especially in recent years, I've seen a lot of investments going into security operations and into Blue Team. And of course, we can always do more and do better. But by and large, organizations are spending a lot of money on their cyber defense these days. And in doing that, we tend to focus a lot on the technical, buy this, buy that, add this technology, you have to have that technology. But we often miss some of the other stuff, some of the really important stuff that makes those technologies effective and enables us to have a real meaningful impact in driving risk down, defending these enterprises for which we're responsible for. And unfortunately, again, by and large, in the aggregate, we're still failing, right? Sure, we're having some success. We're moving the needle, in some senses, but breaches are still happening. We're still getting compromised. We're hearing about this stuff all the time, and we're not driving up attacker cost really as much as we should be for the amount of money and resources that we're spending on this problem. So in order to really start driving things in the direction that we need to drive them, we need to make a mind shift. And in doing that, the reality is that we can do a lot without a huge investment. We can do a lot without the most expensive, next gen advanced technology that's on the market. We can also do it without building up a huge, unsustainable security team. And so this talk, for the rest of our time together, I'm going to focus on kind of the non-technical parts of Blue Team, kind of how the teams are run, what are the things we need to focus on. There are other really, really great presentations and resources out there that address, the technical end of defense and blue team, but we're going to focus primarily, not 100%, but primarily on some of those other areas where we need to focus, that other stuff. So just to set the stage for the rest of our discussion here, what are the challenges that I've seen in my experience working in this part of the security field? And these are some of the major ones. First off is lack of business alignment. This is probably not news to anyone who's on the receiving end of this presentation. But what I see is that security teams often operate in a vacuum, or maybe according to some kind of generic set of best practices, not so much aligned to the enterprise that they're defending. So we often forget, or lose sight of the fact that businesses don't exist to be secure. We're there to support the users, to enable the business or the agency or the organization to do what it does to generate the value that it generates in a secure way. Right? We won't always be able to do that. Sometimes we have to take a back seat to that mission or that business. But either way, I still see many teams that are just not fully aligned to the enterprise that they're defending, the business they're defending. I also see, when we talk about mind shift, I also see what I call the alert watcher mentality. And I think many security teams have sort of started to grow beyond just, log and route, watch up for alerts, escalate them when you see them. But I still see that mentality creeping into daily operations in a lot of places that I come into. And that might not always look like, hey, something flashes red, open a ticket, route it, right? Maybe we're a little past that. But even if we are, I still see tools and events and vendors driving workflow much more than I see security teams devising their own workflow, again, to meet the needs of the business and to align with the business or the organization, and then making the tools support that workflow. And it's a really important distinction, one that I see is not being made nearly as often as I'd like to see it. We have this sustainment mentality in security. Primarily in security operations is where I see this, where we have a build out phase and then we have ongoing operations. And once we've built everything out, once we've deployed all those nice fancy tools, it really just comes down to keeping those things going and sustainment, right? We're just ongoing operations. This is a really dangerous mindset. It can lead to burnout. It can lead to kind of a lackadaisical approach to security, and it can prevent us from growing and evolving the way that we need to. And then finally, data and tools. These are, this is the currency of blue team and security operations. The data that I have, the technology that I'm using to manipulate, to analyze, and to take action based on that data. So either we have too much of that, right? A lot of organizations I see far too much data. Maybe it's not the right kind of data in a lot of cases, but too much noise, not enough signal, or maybe too many tools or not enough tools or not the right tools, right? And while it's not all about technology, we do need a good balance of the right kind of visibility, the right kind of actionable data, and the right technology to help us scale our human expertise, be creative, do what we need to do from an investigative and escalation standpoint. So those are some of the big challenges that I see that we need to overcome if we really want to level up and improve. So before we start talking about ways that we can do that, really getting to the meat of it, I want you all to consider these things. Because in my opinion, many of the pitfalls and many of the ways that we need to overcome some of the challenges and improve security and improve what we're doing on the blue team is, comes down to one of these things. The mission, either we're not as fully aware of it as we should be, we're not supporting it the way that we should be, not aware of what our own role in that larger mission is within the business or within the organization, how we're leading our teams, how those teams are motivated, or in some cases not so motivated. It's going to make a huge difference. And then the culture we're building within the blue team. Okay, and I'm going to dive into all of these things in much more detail in the next few minutes. But again, by and large, most of the challenges, the issues I see in the blue teams that I work with come down to one of these things. So when I talk about fundamentals, what am I really talking about? We have to get back to the basics, right? And in order to do that, We can start with studying the business or the mission. Now, you may be well aware of what your enterprise exists to do, what your company, your agency, your organization, what it does kind of on the face of it. But are you really aware of market forces, competitors? What are the strategic plans of that business? Right? What are all the different kinds of services that your agency, your organization offers? How does it create value? Okay, not only today, but in the next 6 months, in the next year, in the next 5 years. How is it going to create value? How is it going to change? What are the other external forces that are going to impact that, influence it, competitors, other parties that might be very interested in hijacking or reducing that value? Okay, then you can start thinking about what the real risks are and where you should be prioritizing your time and attention. We need to be ready to experiment and iterate. Now, does that mean just throwing anything at the wall and seeing what sticks? No, not necessarily. But remember, I talked about that sustainment mentality, just sitting there, standing a watch. We need to do everything we can to break out of that as often as we can and be ready to grow and improve our capabilities, right? Add new capabilities, swap out things that aren't working well, and iterate over time to make sure we're continuously improving. Incredibly important. I often talk, especially with leadership and executives, about servant leadership. Now, when it comes down to tactical leadership, day-to-day security operations, we need to be ready to share our knowledge. We need to be ready to empower others, right, to lift others up and help our teams improve. And many times what I see in not only security, but in tech in general, we tend to hoard our expertise and hoard our knowledge like it's some kind of currency that once we spend it, we're never going to get it back. But the reality is we need to be able to lift others up, right? Adopt that mentality of servant leadership. And I think that's true whether you're a manager or lead or just one member of a larger team that needs to help your teammates do what they do better and enable them. We need to be prepared to show results. And I'm talking about metrics, and I'll talk more about metrics in a few minutes. Add transparency. Again, businesses do not exist to be secure. So everything that we do that is important to us on a day-to-day basis, that might not be something that resonates with folks outside of the blue team. And we need to acknowledge that and provide them with meaningful information, meaningful data about what we're doing and how well we're doing it. And then finally, we always need to have a plan, okay? Wherever you're going, whatever your strategy, whatever your mission is as a blue team, right? Where are you going to be in 6 months? Where are you going to be in a year? What kind of improvements are you going to make between now and then? Very important to do. So I've said mission probably about a dozen times now. Let's talk about that for a minute. What is your mission really in the blue team? And the answer is not to manage my SIM, to monitor these events, to watch this email inbox, right? To handle user requests. Your mission as a blue team should be defined in a document, some kind of written statement somewhere, right? We often call this a charter, blue team charter or security operations charter, whatever it is. It's something that defines the mission, your constituency, the folks, the business units that you're serving, and your capabilities. What are you there to do? Every member of the team should be able to describe this charter with relatively little variance from team member to team member. If you went to your team right now today and asked, what's our mission? Right, you might be surprised at some of the differences in answers that you would get. So everyone needs to be on the same page about that. Many times it's helpful to have a steering committee, which is a cross-functional group of leadership from all over the business or the organization that's responsible for setting direction for the security team, managing all the requirements of the organization, and ensuring that different divisions, business functions, stakeholders are represented in the blue team, in the security operations center if you have one. And that's a really good way to maintain that kind of organizational alignment that I talked about. The steering committee can also help answer the question to others in the organization, what are they doing? I never know what they're doing, right? We never want to be asked that question. We want everybody to understand the value of what we do. That cross-functional steering committee can be very handy in doing that. Now let's talk about team for a minute. I often describe security teams as falling into one of two buckets from a staffing perspective. And people, whether you realize it or not, are by far the most important part of any security team. Okay, so I look at it as a spectrum, maybe not necessarily buckets, but a spectrum. And on one end, we have talent-centric teams. These are teams that I've been a part of or that I've seen where everyone kind of rallies around one specific individual or maybe a few key individuals that really set the tone for the group. They set operational priorities. They set focus. Hey, here's what we're working on today. Here's what you do if you see this event firing. Here's why we need this technology. These are teams where, again, you've got one or a few key individuals that are really driving the whole operation and on which the whole operation is very reliant. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a mission-centric team. This is where the blue team might be governed by some larger governing body within the organization, or maybe a contract. I see this a lot in government contracts where you have very specifically laid out, here are the things that the team must do. There's no room for experimentation or deviation from that scope. And there's no right or wrong way to staff the team. On a talent-centric team, that might be a great way to get a lot of capability really fast if you need to get spun up quickly, right? And got a lot of wins right out of the gate. But your capacity might be limited. If you're so reliant on one or a few key individuals, right, there's only so much that that person or those people can do. Bias in terms of what you're focused on, right, or how the team works, turnover, those might be bigger problems. Because again, you're heavily reliant on one or just a few key individuals as opposed to kind of leading and driving things by consensus. Conversely, on a mission-centric team, that can be really great for organizational alignment, making sure you're meeting all the needs of the business or that management has set out. Sometimes that brings less flexibility and it can cause you to miss the forest for the trees. Sure, you might be doing everything that's in that contract, but are you really measurably reducing risk and reliably identifying, responding to intrusions, compromises, things like that? So as you look at this, I want you all to think about, in your blue team, are you more on the talent-centric end of the spectrum, or are you more on the mission-centric end of the spectrum? I would be remiss in talking about staffing if I didn't also talk about what kinds of people we really want on the team. And while many of you might not have staffing, decision-making ability, it's helpful to understand, when we run into collaboration challenges or effectiveness challenges, a lot of times it comes down to interpersonal issues. And to try to navigate and hopefully avoid those where we can, we want to make sure we're attracting the right kinds of folks. And that means attracting aptitude, right? The ability to learn and grow one's skill set, the right attitude, which is the willingness to learn and grow one's skill set, to work as part of a team, to make sure the team is successful, a desire to do the work, motivation, and above all else, diversity. Okay, and I mean that in every sense of the word. Your team is not going to be as effective as it should be without diverse backgrounds, diverse ways of thinking, right? Diverse types of education, formal, informal, right? Diversity is key. Diversity of thought is key. We want to avoid over-reliance on credentials. Now, again, I'm an instructor for SANS. I'm a huge fan of formal in-class training, of certifications. Those are great. Where they stop being so great is where we are over-reliant on them as a measure of someone's ability, right? It is a good, useful data point. We don't want to rely on them too much in all circumstances. We want to watch out for egos, right? Putting oneself above the team or the mission, misrepresentation, folks who maybe aren't quite as genuine as they should be when it comes to their skills, abilities, background, experience. So things to watch out for. Now, I said that this talk is mostly not about the technical portions of cyber defense, but I do want to touch on the things that your team absolutely has to have. Any discussion of leveling up, doing advanced things, right? If you're not doing these things right, you're not going to be successful. Visibility, absolutely critical. I think most of us know that at this point. If you're a blue teamer by trade, or if you've done any kind of defensive work, you can't defend what you can't see. So we need access to things like core services, web, email, DNS, right? Endpoint to endpoint communications. We need network and endpoint data so we can see the full picture of everything that's going on in our environment, cloud data where that's relevant. And then again, from a technical perspective, we need to ask, what is our team empowered to do? Okay. In Sec 450, we spend a lot of time talking about this virtuous cycle or this human capital management model where you have to empower technical folks, right? And if they're empowered, then they're more likely to be creative, they're more likely to be effective. So are we empowered to respond to things that we see? Are we empowered to make changes to and improve our telemetry, tune our tools, right? Without that empowerment, the team is really going to be hamstrung in terms of things that it can do, things that it's willing to do, and being able to level up. We also want to measure our success. Remember, we need to be able to tell our story to individuals outside of the blue team where the technicalities of our work might not resonate. It might not motivate them. But telling the right story with the right supporting data, that is very motivating, whether you're in security or not, to the right business leaders and the right stakeholders. So most of you are probably familiar with the phrase KPI or key performance indicator. These are measurements of, in our case, our security operations on a day-to-day basis. Things like, what is our coverage? What's our visibility for our security monitoring and response? How fast are we identifying and responding to security incidents, right? Those are KPIs. What are the distribution of criticality of those incidents, things like that. What you may be less familiar with are OKRs, which are objectives and key results. I believe this originally came out of Intel several years ago under Andy Grove, who I think pioneered the concept of OKRs, if I'm not mistaken. But these are measures that are a little bit higher level. They tie operations to strategy. So remember, I talked about making sure your blue team is aligned to the business. This is a great way to do that. So think about what the priorities of your business or your organization are. Maybe it's, we're getting lit up by social engineering attacks, right? So one strategic objective that we have for the blue team is to reduce those, right? Or reduce their impact. Now, you can use OKRs to bring KPIs into the desired range, right? So thinking again about our example of reducing social engineering attacks, okay, there are several key results that we have to see in order to drive successful social engineering attacks down. Maybe it's faster, better identification of phishing attacks, right? Maybe it's more advanced notification when someone is trying to enumerate our users or actively do active reconnaissance of our environment. Whatever it is, we've got KPIs that help us identify those key results. And we need to bring those into an acceptable range. Maybe for social engineering attacks, maybe it's 0. Highly unlikely, but maybe that's our acceptable range. So we can use OKRs, right, to kind of group these KPIs together and drive them to where we want them to be over time. This adds a little bit more of a narrative to your day-to-day KPIs, helps you tell a better story. So I always tell my clients, look at if you've got your KPIs nailed down pretty well, and you want to start kind of raising the bar slowly, take a look at adding OKRs, defining those, and using them to drive your KPIs to where you want them to be. So again, difference between KPIs, OKRs. KPIs are things, discrete measures of your operation. There's going to be a threshold or a target value that you want each measure to be at. There are going to be specific data sources that you're going to use to get those KPIs, and there will be a sampling frequency, right? Maybe your visibility and coverage KPI is only measured on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, right? But your incident response KPIs are going to be daily. Your monitoring KPIs, might be daily, hourly, what have you. OKRs, they're more about key initiatives. They're going to be finite in nature. There is a desired kind of endpoint where you want to get to, that key objective, and they're going to be results that you need to see along the way to tell you whether or not you're getting to those OKRs. So when we talk about leveling up, this is a big part of making sure you're leveling up in a measurable way, right? In a transparent way, and not just saying, yeah, we're doing a lot better. We're blocking a lot more, attacks. We're responding to things faster, right? This makes it a little bit more scientific and adds a bit more transparency. Another part of improving is taking an honest look at how well you're doing what you're doing in the form of structured self-assessments for the blue team, for the security operations team. And there are lots of different types of self-assessments that you can do. There have been some really great research and writing done about this. Chris Sanders has done a lot about metacognition and assessing your work and kind of looking at what you're doing. But I kind of group them into three buckets, starting with the assessments that you do prior to the work. That work might be an incident response, it might be monitoring, it might be a project. I call these pre-mortems, right? Pre-mortem, as you may guess, is similar to post-mortem, except you do it before the activity. So before a response, right, before a tabletop exercise, whatever it is, you want to do a run through of that scenario, right? How you anticipate the process working, and you want to identify inefficiencies, right? Ineffective tasks within that process, groups or individuals that aren't involved that maybe should be, things like that. That helps you identify issues proactively that you want to address, either during the process or after. During the task, again, whether it's an IR or other activity, you want to be doing QC all along the way, quality control, right? And this could be anything from having that kind of two sets of eyes rule, right? I want someone supervising what I'm doing to, having a lead or somebody supervise specific tasks like evidence collection, escalation, right? And doing investigations, closing out cases, things like that. Quality control is critically important. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a SOC or a blue team to do an assessment. You ask for access to their ticketing system, and you see so many hours spent on tasks and investigations that have gone off the rails, didn't reach the right conclusions, maybe, didn't go well, and no one bothered to look at them along the way. No one bothered to follow the process and do that QC during, and it's not till much later that we're able to identify those issues. So during the process, QC, very, very important. And then you've got postmortems. These are structured reviews of things that have occurred. Let's take a look at this incident. Let's take a look at this investigation, these changes we made. This is very, very important to take an honest look at what we're doing. This is a great exercise, doing a postmortem, to do as part of a brown bag or a team meeting. Pick out a case, pick it apart, right? There are lots of different types of postmortems you can do. You can do an A/B test kind of thing, where maybe you take all the evidence, give it to another person or another team, have them go off, see if they come to the same conclusions or follow the same path that the other team that worked that case did, for example. You can do more of a red teaming type exercise, where you just have folks kind of pick apart what was done. This is not only a great way to kind of build team cohesion and identify opportunities for improvement, it's a great way to create this atmosphere of learning, right? And kind of normalize mistakes, normalize failure, and acceptance of those things as constructive, opportunities for improvement. So always recommend doing this postmortems. Okay, watch out for these things. So we've got I think a basic understanding of some of the things that we can do to improve the efficacy of the blue team, start focusing on some of the right things above and beyond doing that technical work. But again, we want to watch out for that sustainment mentality. That is a blue team killer, and it is a productivity killer. Okay, how many of you listening to this talk show up for your shift on the SOC or the blue team? You kind of go through your playbook, go through your processes. You go home at the end of the day, and you're really just not sure what kind of measurable impact you've had, other than shoving some tickets around, right? Closing out some alerts. Right? That is not the way defense should be. We're stuck in that sustainment mentality. We have to break out of that. Okay, having that steering committee that includes folks that are not a part of the blue team can help us stay out of that, making sure that we're moving and growing and evolving along with the organization. Lack of trust. This is a huge one. Now, there's a really great study that was done not too long ago by the Department of Homeland Security in cooperation with a lot of other organizations, George Mason University, Dartmouth, several other research groups, where researchers studied the impacts of social maturity in incident response teams. And it looked at a lot of these kind of layer 8 issues like communications and collaboration and sharing knowledge. Lack of trust, that is a big issue. That is another blue team killer. If you don't trust your teammates to be able to share knowledge with them, to provide them constructive feedback and input, right, to help them and arm them with information they need to be successful, your team is not going to be successful. In any case where we've got people working together, you're going to have conflicts, you're going to have disagreements. These can be fine. They can even be really helpful as long as they're constructive and we work through them constructively. Lack of empowerment. I already talked about that a little bit, right? Empowerment leads to creativity. How can we do this better, right? Maybe I should go look for this threat that I haven't seen in my tools, but I know is likely to be in my environment, right? We want our humans to be creative because that's what humans do best. But they can't do that unless they're empowered to do that. They have time, resources, management support, right, to be creative, to try different things. If they can do that, guess what? They're going to make improvements in how effective the blue team is. So creativity leads to impact, positives, efficacy, and it's just kind of this ongoing cycle, right? More empowerment leads to better impact. The inverse is also true, right? That wheel can turn the other way as well. If you're restricted, and you may have experienced this in the past, or maybe you're experiencing it right now, if you're not empowered to do things, you're probably going to be less motivated to try to be creative and make improvements. And the performance of the blue team is going to suffer for that. And then finally, role-oriented bias. Now, listen, I know no one in this talk has ever done this, right? But maybe other people that are not on this talk, definitely are out there where, hey, I am a forensic analyst, right? And I'm very focused on that. And that's great. Challenges come in where if I'm a forensic analyst and suddenly everything I do, every IR I see, every investigation, right? One of my first stops is, well, gotta get a disk image, gotta dump the memory, right? Sometimes that is the right place. Sometimes it may not be. My point is not that, forensics shouldn't be a focus. My point is that sometimes, when all you have is a hammer, everything suddenly looks like a nail. And we want to try to keep, our focus somewhat broad. It's great to specialize. And in fact, I always tell, my students that you want to specialize in one or a few areas. But we have to keep our outlook broad and understand that maybe our specific focus or skill set may not always be the right fit for whatever problem set I'm currently working. So task shifting, right? Doing some of that post-mortem activity where we talk about kind of our different perspectives, our different roles in an investigation, things that we might have done differently. This kind of communication, and again, kind of rotating folks through different roles, different tasks, can kind of help us keep that broader focus, that broader awareness, and understand that while we may specialize in various things within the blue team, sometimes our skill sets may not be the right skill set for the job, or maybe we need to engage other teammates, kind of help us solve a problem, or address something that we're trying to do, stay out of that role-oriented bias. And now, again, I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about things that I personally have failed at. One of my favorite business books is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And this book is more of an executive book. It's about his experiences as a manager and a CEO and a leader in various internet startups. And so it's definitely, management, executive focused. It's not security focused. But the reason this book is one of my favorite business books is that Ben talks almost exclusively about things that he has tried, things that he encountered that maybe did not go great, and what he learned from that. And I found the book to be very refreshing in that sense. And so I thought I'd take a page from that and kind of share some of the lessons that I've learned in my 19 years of experience building and leading blue teams. So here we go. And by the way, this is just a very, very short excerpt from a much larger list. Taking action when someone talented drags down team morale is a big one. So again, I know no one here, right? None of us, we're all pretty locked on. We're all very easy and pleasant and wonderful to work with. But sometimes, imagine this if you will, In the security field, you might have someone who's very talented, very smart technically, very capable, right? That does not really work well as part of a larger team, right? Or maybe there's something off in the interpersonal dynamic, okay? And when this goes badly, that can really damage the team. It can bring down morale. It can cause all sorts of other problems that have nothing to do with whether or not, this particular individual has the skills or expertise needed for the job. Now, I myself, on more than one occasion, in fact, have failed to take appropriate action when this is happening. Things go sideways real quick when morale starts to go downhill. And I've had these situations before where whether it's a lack of coaching, a lack of direct and frank feedback to that individual, and also understanding that there are some times where you need to have one set of rules for the team and maybe make allowances if someone just has a different way of working or they have different needs as a team member, right? That's okay. Where that stops being okay is where it starts damaging the team, again, kind of degrading the team's ability to do its job. And the one takeaway from this that I would have is, not that there is one right thing to do in every situation. They're all going to be different, but you have to take action, and you have to take action swiftly. It's very, very important. The second mistake that I have made, and this is something that actually in that book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, Ben coins the phrase putting two in the box. And in his example, he talks about putting two people in an executive role that was meant for one. But I personally have done this and seen it done in operations teams where you might have a lead or a manager, or even the lead for a specific task or project. And you don't want to alienate, anyone on the team. You might have more than one person who is right for that role or right for that task. But in order to kind of not alienate people, right, in order to try to keep everyone happy, you try to put more than one person in that set of responsibilities or in that role. And I have found that that very rarely works. It causes confusion about who people should go to, especially if it's a lead, for example, or a manager on the security team. It causes confusion about who sets the tone, who makes the decision, who is ultimately responsible. And again, whether you're a manager, whether you're a lead or not, it helps to be able to identify, this issue. And whatever your org chart looks like within the team or within the blue team or the larger security organization, you have to have those individuals that kind of drive things, set the tone, that have ultimate say in, the technical task area or in what the team is doing. The third one is big for me. Again, I know definitely not an issue that any of you have had, right? Sometimes in security and in tech in general, we make the mistake of thinking because we have X experience or X technical knowledge, we're smarter than our customer, right? When I say customer, that might be your internal customer, might be your external customer if you're at an MSSP or a consultant, whoever it is, whoever you're working for. Never make the mistake of thinking that because you might be a SME, because you might be a technical expert, you know better than they, what they need. So a lot of this comes back to just being a good listener, listening to your internal users, your stakeholders, your management, your users. Your job is to enable them to do what they do securely. So while there may be a fair amount of belly aching and complaining about security, right? Because we have to strike that balance. We can't let everything go, right? We have to listen. We have to understand that the problems we're trying to solve, the things that we're focused on, not necessarily the things that someone else might be focused on, and we have to be open to that. Shoving a technical solution down someone's throat as a lead, as a manager. I have definitely done this. How many of you, this is a rhetorical question, have a pet project, a favorite tool, something that you really, really like? You don't have to be a manager, right? Maybe you just have a preferred thing and you want everybody to use that thing because it's so great. And have you seen this feature? And it does this. And I just love when, I'm an investigation and I can just click, 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 and it does that, right? Whatever it is. Blue team is a team sport. If more than one people are using a technical solution, it has to be something that works for everyone. And again, whether you're a manager or not, keep in mind that your favorite thing, your favorite focus area, your favorite tool might not work for everyone, and we need to be cognizant of that. I certainly do. Providing feedback on a consistent basis. Okay, so again, this is not just for blue teamers who are managers or leads, right? We have to be able to provide frank, honest, constructive feedback to other folks on the team on a consistent basis. If we're not doing that, if we're not having that conversation, we're not going to be as comfortable with failure. We're not going to be able to improve. We might not even know how we need to improve. So providing that constant feedback is really important. You can't just assume because someone maybe is really good at their job or things are just kind of humming along like they should be. You can't assume that that feedback is still not needed. And that's kind of certainly been my mistake in the past, right? No matter how things are going, you have to have that open communication. You have to have that feedback, okay? This concludes the section on things that I have failed at. Let's move on to things that you can do today. When you leave this virtual conference, when you leave this talk, right, next week, when you're back in your virtual office, go schedule one-on-ones. If you're on a team, schedule a one-on-one with your manager if you don't already have them scheduled. If you're a lead or a manager, schedule one-on-one with your team members. This is a super basic thing, super basic management thing. A lot of technical teams still do not do. So having something on the calendar kind of forces you to have that feedback, forces you to have that conversation. It's a good idea, no matter what. Poll your team. Ask them to discuss the SOC charter and what exactly they are protecting. You can have a lot of fun with this, doing a Slack poll or things like that, right? Get the discussion going. See what the answers are. Make sure everyone is on the same page. Look for ways to remove barriers to communications and teamwork. Okay, listen. This is a big one. Really, really big one. So if you've been, playing the new Avengers video game on the side, or like watching Netflix or checking your phone while I'm talking, I want you all to stop now and listen to this, because this is a big one now that we're on going on day 200 some odd of quarantine. So a lot of us are remote, a lot of us are distributed, whereas maybe we weren't before. Increasingly, blue teams are distributed anyway. So we need to work that much harder to remove barriers to communication, a big one being isolation and separation from each other, excuse me, and look for ways to work together as a team. So a lot of us have collaboration tools. A lot of us are doing meetings over Zoom. You might be feeling a lot of Zoom fatigue at this point, but using some of those tools to build social connections. And that doesn't just mean, hey, you have to go share a bunch of personal information about yourself with people. Maybe that's not your thing, right? But look for ways that you can have conversations about non-tactical day-to-day topics, right? Set up some Slack channels for maybe non-work related things that are of interest to large parts of the group. It really takes a proactive effort to continuously break down those barriers to foster teamwork. I find that trying to put people together in social situations, again, even if that's just, hey, let's just get together and have a chat at the end of the day about whatever you all want, right? Even if it's that, that can really help improve cohesion and help make you more effective as a team. Go out next week, set up a pre-briefing, pre-mortem, or a post-mortem, right? Following on to my last point, if you're at a loss for what you can talk about in your next virtual Zoom meeting, right? You've done all of the virtual exercises and happy hours and crazy hat days that you can think of. Go pick out an investigation, pick out an IR, and pull it apart. Do a postmortem. What worked? What didn't work? Right? What was everyone's experience kind of going through that? Opportunities for improvement. It's a great team building activity. And then pop quiz, also rhetorical, because of course this is pre-recorded, but I'm happy to hear your responses and discussion in the Slack. In the Discord channel. Oops. Pop quiz: is your team talent-centric or is it mission-centric? What part of the spectrum do you fall on? Is that the right end of the spectrum? Thoughts about shifting that a little bit. Do you need to shift it, or is it the right fit for your blue team? Definitely something to think about. What you can do tomorrow. So I'm sure all of you are going to go out in the next 48 hours. You're going to do all these things. You're going to be like, Mark, I'm good to go. I'm officially leveled up. Thanks. Moving on, right? What do you do after that? Again, look for ways to foster interaction, social connections on an ongoing basis. That's one thing that can die on the vine really fast if you're not caring for it. So, especially these days, right? Think of ways that you can foster social interactions, social connections within your team. Can really make a huge impact. Set some clear goals, roles, and standards for how the team operates, how people are going to progress in their careers. You don't have to be a manager or a lead to do that, right? If you're an individual contributor or part of a larger team, you should have clear role description, you should have clear goals, and you should know the standards against which your performance is going to be measured and judged, right? If you don't have that, guess what we can do to talk about that? That's right, one-on-ones, right? We can talk, we can communicate, schedule those meetings. Exemplify communications norms. That is a fancy way of saying be the change you want to see. If all this sounds good to you, if having a more collaborative environment of learning and continuous improvement, if that sounds good, guess what? The change starts with you, right? Exemplify that, whether it's just in how you communicate in the team chat, how you work and document that investigation, right? Be the example that you want to see. We want to create a safe space, right, for failure and learning. That doesn't mean we want to be failing all the time. What we do is high stakes, right? So failure is not the ideal, but it's going to happen sometimes. And that has to be something that we can look at honestly, understand that everybody can fail. The question is, how are we going to learn from it? How are we going to improve as a result? Excuse me. And then pushing the team out of their comfort zone. So in that DHS George Mason study that I mentioned, this was a big one. As far as how can we kind of keep teams learning, keep them on the cutting edge. And many studies have shown that keeping people on the edge of their knowledge, their comfort zone, what they're used to doing, is a great way to keep people learning, to keep people motivated. Now, we don't want to push people too far. We don't want to toss them in the deep end on a daily basis, make them feel overwhelmed and burnt out. And we don't want to do it all the time, okay? But think about ways that either you as a part of a team, or if you're a lead or manager, how you can push the team to the edge of their comfort zone on a regular basis, right? That's where we're going to learn the most and we're going to be able to improve the most. Whether that's, hey, we're going to extend our capabilities a little bit, right? We're going to maybe work with some new technology. We're going to branch out into another part of the organization or the business that we're not especially familiar with. We're going to start working with another team, right, that we haven't worked with before. Those are all good ways to kind of push the team a little bit further than they might be used to. Some other resources that I'll leave you with today. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't plug some of the classes that I work on with SANS. Sec 450. I didn't write this class. John Hubbard is the course author. John is a great blue team expert, and the reason that I agreed to come on board with SANS and start teaching this class is it really resonated with me. There's a big focus on what are the technical priorities of a blue team? How do all those work? Blue team should not be just kind of a way station on your way to some other discipline. And it's a great class. Highly recommend it if you have the means and the opportunity to take it. There's also SANS Management 551, which is building and leading security operations centers. This is a 2-day class. It's currently in beta, also written by John Hubbard. In fact, I am working with John right now to extend it into a longer format, but it's another great class with what I think is the right mentality about SOC and blue team today. I always plug anything written by Chris Sanders or Chris Crowley. These are just two individuals that write and share a lot about what they think works in a blue team, in a SOC, doing the work of an analyst. And I tend to wholeheartedly agree with everything they say. So highly recommend anything that's out there by Chris or Chris. SANS has a really extensive SOC Summit presentation archive. All the talks given at all the SANS summits are out there posted. The Cyber Defense Summit presentations are here at this link. Definitely recommend checking those out. It's a great resource. And I always recommend MITRE's 10 Strategies of a World-Class Security Operations Center. This is free text, free publication that's been out there now for a couple of years, but it still, I think is valid, makes a lot of great points about things you should be looking at and thinking about on a blue team, and kind of ways that you can do that. So it's always a good go-to. With that, I want to thank you all very much for attending. Hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions or just want to talk and nerd out on blue team, you can hit me up in the chat at the time of this presentation. I also want to thank the organizers of BSides Charlotte. I know it takes a lot of work to put these events together, so thank you very much